Hi, I'm Steve Hines. I'm going to spend a few minutes with you helping you to cut through a lot of this misinformation about what is healthy eating in these modern times. If you pick up any newspaper or health magazine nowadays, you'll find any number of conflicting articles about what is healthy nutrition and what is not. One minute alcohol is bad for the liver and it should be avoided. The next minute it extends life and we should drink it. Now it's the same with supplements. One day fish oil is a panacea for health and helps all sorts of diseases, and then some recent research is coming out claiming that it's unhealthy. So why is there so much conflicting information, and how do we cut through all of this information to make the best choices? With most research, there is always an ulterior motive built in. So pharmaceutical research, for example, will tell you that the drugs that they produce help to treat diseases such as statins, lowering cholesterol and preventing heart disease. Now, of course they will. They're not going to pay for and publish studies that say their drugs don't work. And more alarmingly, these companies have been known to press ahead with pushing drugs onto the market that have not been properly tested and are in fact harmful. So think of some drugs that have recently been taken off of the market because they were causing deaths, such as the anti-inflammatory Vioxx. Now it's the same for research on food. Take organic food, for example. The big corporations that produce pesticides will tell you that their pesticides are harmless. Now, of course they will. They're not going to publish research that says that their substances are dangerous because they won't sell any pesticides to farmers. And conversely, organisations that stand to profit from selling organic food are going to tell you that their food is more nutrient dense and healthier. Now, the same is true for vitamin pills, protein powders, all manner of foods and supplements and drugs. Invested interests always win. Now, unfortunately, there are very few well-designed independent research studies out there that are not biased in some way or that do not have some kind of invested interest at heart. So when a good piece of research does come out, it's either ignored by the mass media or only really acknowledged by industry professionals who will then try and pass this information on to the public, or worse, it's going to be attacked and vilified by these big corporations who stand to lose profits from this information that disagrees with their point of view, gathering publicity. Now, don't get me wrong, research is vitally important to keeping us up to date with this continually evolving evidence base of what actually is healthy and what is not. It's just that some people will only ever recommend or suggest anything that has research to support it. Now, this is like looking at the world through a straw. First, as I've said, a lot of this research is biased. Now, it doesn't mean we should just ignore it. You have to evaluate it, put it into the context that the research was actually conducted in. You need to ask who funded it, what are the outcomes from this research, what do the people who funded it stand to gain, and can I rely on it? But secondly, having a piece of research to support your claims or point of view are not always the gold standard. So clinical experience has a huge role to play in making the right suggestions for people. Now take for instance the example of folic acid. Now it took nearly 40 years of research before doctors accepted that it prevented spina bifida. Now I'm playing devil's advocate here, but if it had been a drug, it would have been accepted on the market within months, not years. Now, how many people could have been saved from spina bifida had people and doctors just accepted that folic acid worked and that taking a small dose might be very beneficial and probably wouldn't have any harmful effects? Did we really need to wait 40 years for science to rubber stamp its use? Okay, so where do we go from here? What do we believe? As I've said, ignoring all the research that comes out is a mistake. It should be sifted through and used in conjunction with clinical experience. But it can also be used in conjunction with these two gems from the past and a gem from the present. Gem number one. Weston A. Price, in his book Nutritional Physical Degeneration, clearly outlines what healthy humans do and do not do. Now, Weston A. Price was a dentist and a scientist, and he traveled around the world in the late 1920s, early 1930s, studying indigenous populations, their food and their nutrient intake, and looking at their dentition and what diseases they suffered from. Now, he studied lots of different people: the Eskimos, the North American Indians, tribes in South America and Africa, the Aborigines, the New Zealand Maori, Pacific Islanders, isolated communities in Switzerland and Ireland, and people in India. Each group studied all ate completely different diets, foods that were available to them in their natural surroundings, and foods that their families had eaten for generations. Now, the Eskimos ate a lot of salmon, seal meat, elk, and very little fresh fruit and vegetables, as it just wasn't available to them. The South American Indians ate rodents and insects and plant life because large game wasn't available to them. The African tribes lived off of their cows by drinking their blood and drinking dairy, practices that still go on in that part of the world now. The Aborigines lived off of grubs and underground tubers, and the Pacific Islanders lived off of coconuts, coconut oil, and palm oils. Now, when these people ate the way their families had done for generations, there was very little incidence of diseases of the day, such as tuberculosis, pneumonia, and arthritis, and there were very little incidence of dental cavities. However, when these people came into contact with white man and white man's food, which back then included sugar, flour, tinned and processed foods, they soon became ravaged with dental disease, TB, arthritis, birth defects, and many other diseases. Gem number 2. Dr. Francis Marion Pottinger conducted research on cats back in the 1930s and 1940s. Now, he wanted to assess the effect of different diets containing either raw food or processed food, and look what this did to the health of successive generations of cats. Now, essentially, the cats that lived off of raw milk, raw meat, the foods that cats are supposed to eat, maintained good health generation after generation. However, the cats that ate cooked and processed foods, such as condensed milk, cooked meat, became progressively more sick and more degenerate. Each successive generation of cats had poorer bone formation, such as poor formation of the facial bones. Their skeletons contained less calcium, and these cats were prone to more fractures. The cats became lethargic and less agile, and by the fourth generation, these cats were severely malformed and infertile. Now, this research was conducted on cats, and a weak argument is that it may not be applicable to humans. However, Dr. Pottinger observed many of the same patterns in his human patients. Those that ate processed foods became sick and degenerate. Those that ate healthy foods stayed healthy. Now, Dan Buettner is the modern day Weston A. Price. This is gem number 3. He too travelled the world looking for the longest lived populations and people, and Dan found 4 areas where there lived unusually high concentrations of centenarians. Now, these areas were Sardinia, Okinawa, California, and Costa Rica, and he named these areas blue zones, and he's written a book of the same name to sort of account his journey and his findings. Now, what Dan found mirrors the work of Weston A. Price nearly 80 years ago. The blue zone populations tended to eat the way their ancestors had eaten before them. They avoided processed and modern junk foods, and they lived an active and stress-free life. Now, in Dan's book, he tells quite a funny story about an old lady in Okinawa. When she first came across a burger joint, she asked, "What am I supposed to do with this?" It was so foreign to her, it wasn't even perceived as food. Now, this research could all be a little bit confusing, as all of these healthy human populations ate different diets with different amounts of protein and different amounts of fats and different amounts of carbohydrates. And it goes some way into explaining why there's all of this conflicting research that we see in modern times about which diets work and which diets don't work. But the one kind of common denominator from all of this research is that they all avoided processed foods and ate foods in their natural, whole grain, fresh state. When these people and cats did eat processed foods, they became sick, infertile, and suffered from disease. So I think there's two statements that best sum this up. One is from Jack LaLanne: if God made it, or if nature made it, it's good for you. If man made it, avoid it. And Michael Pollan, in his book In Defense of Food, suggests that we eat food, not too much, mostly plants. Well, that's a bit of a simple saying, but what he means by that is eat real foods, not these processed junk foods, saturated fat and trans fat laden foods and sugar laden foods. Eat real foods, not too much, and mostly plants. If you like this information and you want to find out more about health and fitness, you can visit us at www.peakxvfitness.com, and you can find out more information and follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube.